I want to talk about the way you think about change, because here's how I see the present moment. Most people that are paying attention agree that things are broken, that they're not working the way that they should. And it seems to me that there are two reactions to this. One is the attitude of the reformers, right? Who basically say, you're right, things are broken, but we can fix them. And we can fix them by tinkering at the margins. And we can get back to the place before brokenness by focusing on the right values, by reasserting liberalism, by reasserting Enlightenment ideals. And then there are the radicals or the revolutionaries. And these radicals say, you know what? Things are broken, and we need to understand the foundations for that brokenness. There was something inherent in that worldview, in the worldview of liberalism, say, that got us to this juncture. And the only way we can solve things is by looking at the root cause, by looking at the root problems. And it strikes me that that is the camp that you find yourself in. And I want you to make that case for radicalism and against reformation.
Yes. Well, to frame this maybe in a slightly too political way, I think there's a group of people who characterize themselves as the true liberals. And then somehow they have not changed any of their values. It's the way they describe themselves. The rest of society has changed. Liberalism has become illiberal, and they don't quite understand this. And what that reminds me of is sort of Marxist professors in the 1970s who described themselves as the true communists, and the true communism had never been tried. Yeah, so that's where I end up being on the not reformist, but more radical side, that somehow things have gone very wrong, and we have to ask questions about not just where did things go wrong 5 years ago in the Great Awakening,
but centuries ago.
At least 50 years ago, which is when I put the tech stagnation, and maybe 100 years ago where Europe self-destructed in World War I, and it became sort of a more fundamentally pessimistic place where a lot of the tech innovation that happened had this very dangerous military dimension. And so from a European perspective after 1914, the question of progress was much more, it was very different from the 19th century where it was sort of much more broadly hopeful and optimistic. So something went wrong in Europe much earlier. I don't, if we go centuries back, that's...
Well, you've criticized the Enlightenment.
There are a lot of things that were good about the Enlightenment. It had to go that way, but certainly the French Revolution was already sort of a sort of prototype for these sort of totalitarian 20th century nightmares that we had. And so there's an Enlightenment question of where one could be optimistic about human rationality, human potential in the 1770s in a way that was probably harder after 1789 and what happened in France. So yeah, I think there are all sorts of things that one should rethink. I'm not a reactionary, though. I don't think we can go back in any sense. And even if we could go back, wouldn't that just be a Groundhog Day? If we could go back to 1960, wouldn't that just be a way in which we would cycle and repeat? And the WASP establishment, with all the things that were good and bad about it, it would collapse like it did in the late 60s, and the same thing would happen. And so I think there's a part of understanding the history that's very important, and understanding what's going on and why it happened, that's very important. But then what we must do now may be a very different dimension of the problem.